Yeah.
But yeah, it was,
It's just a bar. Yeah. Yeah. So there's the Old Chicago Inn upstairs, which is like a small like boutique hotel or whatever.
All right, Sam. Get the book out. Just kidding, just kidding. All right, everyone. If we want to find our seats, get cozy, get comfortable. If you're seeing us in person, just go ahead and make sure that phone is on silent. Yeah, silence your cell phones. I'm not Nicole Kidman, and this isn't the AMC, but we do appreciate your cooperation. Thank you guys so much for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces. Thanks for coming back. If you're watching online, hey. Have any first-timers in here today? Ooh! Okay, we hope you come back. We're very nice. Thanks for being here. So for those of you that are new, hello, my name is Patty. I'm the founder and executive director of Chicago for Chicagoans. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around for 8 years now. We'll be celebrating our 8th anniversary this June, which is pretty wild. You know, it ain't easy out here for small nonprofit organizations, so just gonna, all right. In all seriousness, we are a volunteer-run nonprofit. The majority of your generous donations just pay for our operating costs and pay our very talented speakers for their time. So if you are interested in donating to a nonprofit where you know exactly where your money goes, hey, hello. We accept all forms of payment. All of our events are pay what you can. Our mission is to create affordable history programming for all Chicagoans to learn more about the history of their own city. So all of our public events are always pay what you can because we want you to be able to learn about your community, whether or not you got a fat wallet tonight. But if you do have a fat wallet tonight, as I mentioned, we take cash, check, kidneys. They have a great resale value in the black market. Venmo, Zelle, PayPal. If you can pay it to me, I'll try to get it from you. Corporate, matching programs. Hey, think of us. But yeah. So we really encourage you to donate to our organization if you have some scratch and feel like you have a good time. It's the best review you can give us. But every year we have a winter activity series and we have a summer activity series. So every winter we do this lecture series here at Room 13, and we always pick a theme for our lecture. So this lecture series is all about Chicago as a city of influence. All of the things that we created and the rest of the world took advantage of. So that's kind of all the different things we've been doing this year. If this is your first lecture, come back. We have a lot of great lectures throughout the month of March, all given by women because it is Women's History Month, obviously. Yeah, hell yeah, women. So we have a pretty great lineup of speakers in March, and our final program of the season will be April 11th, after which point we move into walking tour season. So we do tours in over 35 different neighborhoods across Chicago. We work with over 30 different guides. So it's a really eclectic mix of locals showing you their neighborhood, and that's our whole philosophy. That's what we want to produce. So we're really excited to be here. We hope you come back in the summer. I think I'm done stalling for time. I see that pretty much everyone at the bar line has gotten a drink. So that's really the purpose of this. It's an introduction, but it's also a way to buy time. So I will go ahead and shut up and give a very wonderful introduction for tonight's speaker. She is the third person we ever had give a walking tour for Chicago for Chicagoans. She has been with us for 8 years. I was the first. So this is a very exclusive club of people. A good personal friend that I bullied into giving tours and still does. If you come to enough of these events and I start to recognize you, it's just a matter of time before I try to convince you to give tours.
Some people take longer than others.
Juliana here in the corner, a chief example. It took me 5 years. And now she's like, I had so much fun last year. I have 5 more ideas. So we do a program every year called Tour Guide 101. It's totally free. You can come learn how to be a tour guide, and then I'll try to get you to give walking tours for me forever. But it's a really fun program. We really hope that if you have a good time, you be as cool as Sam. Sam gives our Edgewater tours. Sam has been our resident Jewish historian for a long time, partnering with me on some programs in Albany Park, talking about the history of Jewish folks in Chicago. Loves to talk about death and murder. Is our resident Pirates of the Great Lakes experts. If you ever want to check out that lecture, it is one of our most streamed on our Facebook. Very good. If you want to learn about pirates, the Mormon King of Beaver Island, a real thing. Mormon Pirate King of Beaver Island. That's Sam. Sam's the one that taught me that fact. And tonight, she's going to teach you a bunch of facts about amusement parks, and I'm almost certain there's going to be at least one murder.
A death.
Okay, a death. There is a death, though. Checks out. So without further ado, please give her a nice warm welcome.
All right. Hi, everybody. So my name is Samantha Prestigiacomo. That's a very, very long name, I know. So don't worry about trying to say it. So I've been a collaborator with Patty for the last 8 years. I am also a tour guide at the Art Institute and a shop girl and a tattoo artist. So like many of the people that I'm going to talk about tonight, I appreciate the grift. So very, very excited to be talking tonight about the World's Fair. All good?
Can you tilt the mic a little bit? Just get a little closer up to the
All right, how am I sounding now? I'm going to enunciate a little bit better. Okay, so we'll try to be as loud as possible in this very small space. But I have the story of the World's Fair to talk about, but as the lecture series is about Chicago City of Influence, I'm not just going to talk a little bit about the World's Fair, which is honestly a topic you could fill hours and hours of time with, but particularly the way that the World's Fair invented the modern idea of the amusement park. So we're going to talk about the World's Fair, how it kind of accidentally became an amusement park, and some of those different, very interesting characters that took those ideas and spread them across the country. So just starting with the history of the World's Fair in Chicago, some of you are probably a little familiar with this, but just going to talk about how the World's Fair got started, what the organizers were really trying to accomplish with it. So the World's Fair was held in Chicago between May 1st to October 31st, 1893, held in Jackson Park. One of the Chicago stars on our flag represents the World's Fair. It's really something that the city saw as a really big deal and is still very, very proud of, was a very important cultural event. And some of the things that people remember for it now, the White City, the murders, really detract from the cultural impact that it had on the time. So we're going to focus a little bit more on that. I could give a completely other lecture on the murders, which, maybe I'll get the opportunity to do. So there had been a World's Fair, which was kind of a exposition of arts and culture held in Paris in 1889, where the Eiffel Tower was unveiled. And after that, there was kind of a clamor to hold a World's Fair in the U.S., and a lot of major cities started a bidding war to host the American World's Fair, including St. Louis, New York, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. Part of the reason that they wanted to have an American World's Fair is that this is kind of during the Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of kind of tension happening as the world is industrializing, a lot of class tension, and the World's Fairs that had happened in Paris and then the Crystal Exhibition in London had done a lot to kind of boost national pride and morale. So it was important for them to have it here, but when it came to which city was going to host it, New York really, really wanted it. So there was a group of New York businessmen, including J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt, William Waldorf Astor, a lot of big names that we still recognize, made a bid for $15 million. And then at the very last second, a Chicago banker named Lyman Gage raised several $million in a 24-hour period to outbid the New Yorkers. And the bidding war actually got so intense that it actually had to go to vote at Congress. So the American Congress had to decide who was going to host the World Fair, and this last sort of stunt by Gage put it into Chicago's favor. Chicago won the bid. Other financial contributors were Marshall Field and Cyrus McCormick Jr. They argued that Chicago was the only place fit to house the fair for reasons of access, supplies, available land, access to fresh water, building materials that New York would not have been able to supply. So that, along with the money that they were able to raise, is what got Chicago the World's Fair. Previously, the drama that led up to this, there's a newspaper quote that I included that I think is really funny. New York Sun editor Charles A. Dana wrote before Chicago won the fair, "Don't pay any attention to the nonsensical claims of that windy city. It could not build a World's Fair even if they won it." So then we won it. And pretty quickly they realized, oh shit, we did it. now we have less than 2 years to put together a World's Fair on the scale that we promised. So then they actually go to build the fair. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about, in our images that I have here, I know these are passed around. So Patty, you put the last image first. So I ask everyone to ignore that and go to image 2. So before we start talking about some of these key figures, I've included a couple images of the World's Fair, photographs and advertisements to attract people to it, just to give you an idea of the scale. Another couple of important sort of historical context facts is that in 1871, we had had the Great Chicago Fire, and Chicago had lost almost a third of its downtown area. And after the Great Chicago Fire, the city was kind of leveled, but we had the infrastructure of a major city. So it gave them the kind of unique opportunity to build back all at once. And Chicago became a location where young, progressive, innovative architects were very attracted to us because it was the place to come if you were interested in new technology, in new building materials, in new building innovations. So there was a lot of these very intelligent young people that came to Chicago for that building boom that happened post-Chicago Fire. And one of them was Daniel Burnham, who, if you have come to our lectures, we are big, Patty's boyfriend, we are big Daniel Burnham fans. Daniel Hudson Burnham is the big daddy of Chicago, and we love him. So I have, besides some early pictures of the fair here, then you turn over and there's a not great printout of Burnham, but he's pretty zaddy, you know, like, so we have him there. So some background about Burnham, because he's very, very important. So Burnham came to Chicago at 26 during this building boom. He met his future business partner, John Wellborn Root, who was already established here, and they opened their own office in 1873. They were early developers of steel frame construction. So there's kind of some, in other tours I do, there's actually a lot of discourse about who invented the skyscraper. A lot of different firms were sort of experimenting with steel frame construction at the same time. So we're going to leave that discourse open, but they were some of the first and some of the most impressive. So they were early developers of that steel frame construction and became very famous as Chicago architects. Excellent. Okay. So I'm just going to get probably pretty drunk while I'm giving this lecture. Yeah, so you'll see me in a second. I have a little light up here. I'm already a drink in. Yeah, there's an all right.
Project directly into the microphone.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Give me a second. All right, I said I was going to be shooting whiskey during this lecture, so bear with me. So Burnham has this early start. He makes a name for himself as a really big-time architect here in the city. And by the time the World's Fair rolls around, he is given the honor of being the director of the building of the fair. He puts together a super group of architects. He really compiles this team from architects all across the nation, brings them to Chicago, and says, this is a really big deal. We are going to make something absolutely fucking fantabulous, and we only have about 6 months to do it. What they put together first, and this is 15 years before his plan of Chicago, the thing that he's the most famous for. So first what they do is they put together a planning guide for the fair. There has never really been a planning guide on this scale before for this level of development. The World's Fair plan included boulevards with classical building facades, waterways, a central lagoon, lush gardens, all to kind of temper the crowds of the space that they believed that they would attract. So the plan that they made also, as far as influence, we're going to talk more about amusement parks for most of this lecture, but I want to say too that the architecture plans that Burnham created for the World's Fair also had such a huge echo influence on architecture across the United States, because people came to the World's Fair, saw the World's Fair, saw the waterworks, saw the lagoons, saw the neoclassical building designs, and then they went back to their estates and who knows where and said, I want that. So the kind of wave of neoclassical design across the country at this time is also largely due to Burnham's plans. So Burnham's plan followed what he believed a city should be, and his white city, his plan for the World's Fair was, in his mind, the ideal city, that it would be designed to follow Beaux Arts principles. He was a Beaux Arts fellow, symmetrical, neoclassical design and grand splendor, really making people feel like they were part of something bigger, and also taking a lot of influence from, again, neoclassical great cities of Greece and Rome. So after Burnham took control of the World's Fair, there was some fighting in the beginning because Chicago wins the bid, and then all of a sudden there's a bunch of people that think that they know what is right, and Burnham kind of had to put his foot down and say, actually, from now on, I am the boss. Everyone is going to listen to me and only take direction from me. He sent out essentially a letter that was like, from now on, you are only going to take executive orders from me. Because the director of the fair, Davis, and some of the other big investors had problems with some of the plans that he had early on. So he, again, put his foot down and said, I am the daddy of the World's Fair. You're only going to listen to me. He becomes Davis, the head of the fair commission. He says, shut up, I'm going to do what I want to do. And after he kind of takes control of this, Olmsted, who's the next guy I'm going to talk about, we have this lovely painting of him here. There's a really great quote of Olmsted I wanted to share. And he says about Burnham that too high an estimate cannot be placed on the industry, skill, and tact with which this result was secured by the master of us all. Yeah, swoon. So yeah, so much can be said about Burnham and his plans and his ability to kind of corral people together to actually pull this off. And then he goes on to eventually create the Plan of Chicago that began in 1906, published in 1909. This grand plan that he had for the city to develop. The reason Chicago is a perfect grid is because it was kind of all built at once in accordance to this grand plan of Chicago. So older cities like Boston and older European cities, they kind of have this more organic, sprawling sort of effect because they grow organically and they've existed for much longer. But Chicago is a perfect grid because they planned the city all at one time. And a lot of that building boom happened in a very short amount of time. So moving on, the next big influencer of the World's Fair, I have this lovely painting of him here, is Frederick Law Olmsted. So Olmsted is another just really interesting person that we could honestly do a whole lecture about. I really encourage everybody to look up these people and read about them, read biographies of their lives, because they're all so interesting. But Olmsted spent most of his career as a journalist. So he spent a lot of time going through the American South. He was a early proponent of abolition. He did a lot of interviews and a lot of journalism against slavery in the South, pre-Civil War. He kind of builds this reputation as a journalist that is interested in social issues. And he develops over the course of this career a social conscience about class and about how cities should be structured that he becomes very well known for. And then later in his life, once he's established himself as a pretty famous journalist, he takes a complete pivot and he teams up with, this is what I'm going to not be able to pronounce French words for the rest of the lecture, Calvert-Vaux. He teams up with a designer named Calvert-Vaux and does his very, very first job as a landscape architect, which is the design for Central Park. Yeah, so Calvert-Vaux sort of reached out to Olmsted because Olmsted had, over the course of his career, developed these theories about public natural space He had gone to England and he had seen the public gardens that existed. And in his other travels across the world, he believed that a lot of the tension and the crime and the issues that urban places were having during the course of industrialization was that green space was disappearing and green space was so important. So that attracted Vaux to him, and he brought him in for this design for Central Park in New York. So Central Park was obviously a huge success. And after the design of Central Park, which was largely influenced by these public gardens in the UK, he starts a whole new career as a landscape architect, and he kind of becomes the father of American landscape architecture. So when they start planning the World's Fair, they're like, that's the guy we want. So they bring in Olmsted, and he's part of Burnham's super group of architects to design the World's Fair. Again, he believed in this like common green space. He thought that all levels of society, all people should have access to green space, to parkland, in order to improve society as a whole. So he starts to design the landscape of the World's Fair to kind of soften what he actually thought was Burnham's very ugly buildings. He believed that the buildings were kind of blemishes to his landscape design versus a compliment. But the idea of the landscape design of the World's Fair was, and I have a quote here, to establish a considerable extent of broad and apparently natural scenery, in contemplation of which a degree of quieting influence will be had, counteractive to the effect of artificial grandeur and the crowd's pomp, splendor, and bustle of the rest of the exposition. I want to say, too, that his words, the apparently natural scenery. So there was some budgeting issue during the construction of the World's Fair, and they realized immediately that they did not have the budget for the landscaping that they had initially planned. There was also a depression during this time. There was an economic panic of 1893. So what they had to do was actually go and harvest natural plants in the Illinois region, and they largely used natural plants to fill in the architecture of the landscape design that they did. So the idea is that it feels very natural, and it feels natural to the environment, but it was all artificial, all contrived. And that becomes very important to the thematic idea of an amusement park itself. So the apparent natural quality of his design. So Olmsted and Burnham are making this incredible plan. They're both incredibly talented. They have a lot of other talented people that they're working with, and they managed to pull off the World's Fair to open May 1st, 1893. The fair opened on May 1st when President Grover Cleveland flipped an electrical switch, illuminating the fair and saying, "As by a touch, the machinery that gives life to this vast exposition is now set in motion." So at this time, this is during the War of the Currents, Tesla versus Edison. So electricity is also very new, another thing we could give an entire lecture about. But Tesla, for the one time in his entire life, actually did win this time. And all of the, the Tesla had won the bid for powering the World's Fair, but Edison did get a lot of his technology highlighted in it. So the World's Fair was completely lit by incandescent bulbs, by artificial electricity. This was a huge deal. This was the largest scale of electric light in the US. So this was also a big draw. Now that we're actually at the World's Fair. So what the World's Fair represented, not just for Chicago as kind of premiering on the world stage as a leader of culture, of technology, of art. You know, Chicago had suffered a lot during the fire, and the reason they really, really wanted the World's Fair was to kind of then debut onto the world stage as a world-class city, as something that could be comparable to the great cities of Europe, to the great cities of antiquity. It was literally Chicago's big debut. So they were very, very proud of it in that fact. So it was also contrived as 400 years of Western influence. We're not going to give him credit during this lecture, but it was meant to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Columbus arriving in America. But for them, it was a very big deal to sort of commemorate 400 years of progress in technology and culture and art in the Americas. So that's what the fair was meant to represent for them. So to illuminate it by electric light, to have all these different buildings that commemorated all these technological advancements was very, very important. So the fair itself opens. There's also some discourse here. Between 150 and 200 buildings were constructed for the World's Fair. Most of these were meant to be temporary. So they were constructed out of something called staff, plaster, and then painted white. So they had this sort of effect of being neoclassical, of being these really grand structures, but they were meant to be temporary. They were all meant to be taken apart once the World's Fair was over. There was a grand boulevard that had a lagoon. The lagoon featured reconstructions of all three of Columbus's ships, as well as gondolas that would take people across the lagoon, and a recreation of a Viking warship. So some of the water features that were included, seeing these tall ships out on the lagoon. I think we have... Yeah, so we have this map of the World's Fair, which the map itself is important. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just to give you some of the idea of the scale, this central lagoon feature, and all of these beautiful 200 or so buildings that were constructed for it. And all of these buildings were illuminated by incandescent light. There is a theory that L. Frank Baum visited the World's Fair and was inspired by this white city to create the Emerald City in his Oz books, which definitely, I think, makes sense. So the fair opens with that lighting of the lamps. It was 690 acres of land, representing 46 different countries, all 40 of the then United States. It held 26 million visitors in the 6 months of its opening, or lasting. Now I'm getting a little bit drunk. Some things to be said about consumption during the World's Fair, because there really has never been anything on this scale. They took a lot of inspiration from previous World's Fairs and previous expos, but they decided to look at all of that inspiration and take it times 1,000 as far as consumption, as far as attractions, as far as what they were showcasing. So all of those 200 buildings had distinct themes. There was a hall of electricity, there was a hall of mining, there was really a hall for any kind of category of technology that you could think of for people to visit. There were turnstiles were a new thing to kind of work with the crowds. There was a map of the fairgrounds, which was pretty innovative for visiting something on this scale. People were really tickled by receiving a map of how big the fairground actually was, which I've included here. There were moving sidewalks. So imagine the hydro sidewalks that you have at the airport. Those were revealed at the World's Fair. Those were used to get around some of these exhibits. There were security guards, also pretty new, necessary for something on this scale. As far as technology that was introduced at the World's Fair, we're just going to do like a kind of speed run of all the things that were introduced here to talk about how that influence occurred. So things that were unveiled at the World's Fair: fax machines, X-ray technology, glass blowing machines. So the industrialization of glass blowing, which previously had been something that was artisanal and expensive, light bulbs, phonographs, juicy fruit gum, many different steam technologies, and zippers. Yes, among others. So the technology that was presented there was displayed in these great halls, and there was a lot of kind of branding. in a way that wasn't really seen before. So as far as relating a technology to a way of life, to a way of being, relating people to the technology, this is all cutting edge at the time. It was kind of a maker's mart of this new technology and was kind of a test run of this new kind of capitalist branding that we would see into the 20th century, because not only are they unveiling this new technology, but they're trying to sell it to people as a lifestyle. They're saying, look at you, you're at the edge of the future, and if you have this in your life, you're special, and if you have all of this stuff, you're special. So some of that technology was sent. The other thing is that the control of how people were maneuvered around the fair was very important. And this is actually kind of the key thing that inspired this next kind of generation of people to create these amusement parks, theme parks, where you have a location that feels organic, feels like people are moving through the space organically and discovering things, but really it's incredibly controlled. That you have decided where they are going to go, what order they're going to see things in, how they're going to move around it, and even the respite, even the oasis space, the gardens, to kind of break up the bustle, are artificial, are kind of put there for you. So unlike a real city, which is very chaotic, the White City had this effect of being very efficient, very controlled, organized into distinct zones where they could organize people and organize your experience of the fair itself. And this is all very, very important moving into our new capitalist nightmare of the next century. So in our next couple of slides, I have some images of the Midway Plaisance, which I think you all have become familiar with. Yeah. So the accident of the fair was that the fair was actually not as popular as the Midway Plaisance. So what they tried to do was create this main fairground that had, again, those 200 buildings, all of this art and progress and technology, beautiful restaurants, just beauty everywhere to enjoy. And then there was all this other stuff that they wanted to include, as attractions. But Burnham and Olmsted and some of the other collaborators were like, that stuff is kind of low class. It can be there, but we kind of want it separate. We want to keep the World's Fair, the fairgrounds itself, kind of classy. So let's put all that other stuff in this other area. And that was the Midway Plaisance, which was basically the entertainment district. And that is where they put a lot of the entertainment, a lot of the attractions. That's where the Ferris wheel ended up, which we'll talk more about in a second. But the Midway Plaisance, kind of on accident, became the first amusement park. So in the Midway, so first of all, when the fair is first unveiled, it doesn't attract as many people as they were really hoping it would. And it's actually the Midway that kind of gets the ball rolling, because at first people didn't know about the fair, or they were waiting to hear if the fair was interesting or successful. And it's really, word of mouth at this time and journalism that brings people in. People have to go and say, oh my God, you have to check this out, for it to spread and eventually draw the crowds that it eventually does. But initially, it was actually underperforming, and they were having trouble bringing people into the fair. And it was the Midway that attracted the crowds and actually brought people to the fair. So a couple things about the Midway, what they had there, what people were coming to see. So there was this idea of cultural zones, these different sort of areas of immersion. There were foreign villages, there were human zoos, which we'll talk about in a second too, including a reconstructed street in Cairo, Egypt. There was a famous dancer named Little Egypt. Her name was Farida Mazar. She was American of Syrian descent. and she was kind of billed at the World's Fair as an exotic dancer, and it was actually the first time belly dancing was introduced to the American public. So very different, again, from belly dancing that we understand today. She was actually completely covered with veils of fabric, but she was uncorseted. So very lewd at the time. And in particular, this Little Egypt Act was kind of the first thing to get a lot of press about the World's Fair. There was a young theater performer named Solomon Bloom, who was responsible for a lot of the press that the Midway got early on. He was responsible for the Little Egypt Act. He had actually purchased and on his own finances flown in the Algerian village that had been part of the Paris World's Fair 5 years earlier. And he billed the Little Egypt Belly Dancing Act as this exotic, special, lewd performance. And the other really special thing that he decided to do was only let men in on the performance. So you have this double effect of all these men thinking that they're, being invited to something very lewd and discreet and special. So it drew a lot of press, a lot of attention. There were crazy rumors about this dancer. There was actually a rumor that Mark Twain had seen her perform and it caused him to have a heart attack. So there was also rumors that she performed completely naked. All this kind of press kind of echoing out and drawing people into the Midway. Sex sells, it always has. So Solomon Bloom was very smart for trying to get bodies into the fair for this reason. And he had actually kind of been already in contention with other organizers of the Midway, where these human zoos and these ethno-villages were constructed to kind of be a living museum and be taken seriously. And he was like, no. This needs to be fun. Like people need to come here and have fun, and they need to feel like they're seeing something they shouldn't be seeing. So he had kind of learned that in his theater career. So that was up to Mr. Bloom. So these ethno-villages that existed in the Midway Plaisance too. This is kind of the early version of Epcot. This is really when we get into the groundwork that the fair laid for our idea of what amusement parks should be. So wealthy people during this time, during the Victorian age, often sent their kids on what was known as the Grand Tour. So they would let their kids, once they reached early adulthood, go on a grand tour of Europe, where they would travel to different countries, go to great cities, go to great museums to learn about the culture, to become educated in worldly things. I'm 2 down now. Before they entered their professional lives. And this grand tour was something that was really only afforded to wealthy people and the children of wealthy aristocratic families. So it was really a brilliant idea to recreate this grand tour at the World's Fair in a miniature version, where people could feel like they had visited foreign countries, foreign lands, in these immersive kind of theater performances. It was very contrived. It was, completely faked version of actually going to a place and experiencing its cultures and customs, but it was the Victorian equivalent to actually going to Egypt, to actually going to different countries in Europe. So some of those different villages that were constructed for the World's Fair included German, Irish, Dutch, Inuit, Turkish, Sudanese, Nubian, and Bedouin villages, also including that Algerian village and the Little Cairo that was constructed for the World's Fair. So, similar to when you're walking around Epcot and you're kind of going from country to country, there was this feeling that they had of visiting these places, getting to see sights, getting to experience foods and smells and people from all these different cultures, usually actually funded by the countries that they were representing. With performers that were kind of there as anthropological wonders, performing their culture in an exaggerated way to please patrons of the fair. Absolutely, fabulous intercultural exchange for the Victorian mind. Very racist by today's standards. So with this contrived cultural village comes this invention of thematic space, which is the next thing I want to kind of like point out and remember when we talk about the idea of an amusement park or a theme park. So all theme parks are amusement parks, but not all amusement parks are theme parks. Theme parks have a overall theme that everything in the park adheres to. But this idea of thematic space, of immersive theater, is something that people are just kind of experiencing for the first time and at a very large scale at the World's Fair. So people go and experience this and they take it with them and they go, okay, that was great. How do I recreate this and make money? Which leads to the development of other amusement parks, which I'll get to in a second when we're done talking about the Midway. I'll talk about the death that I had planned for you. So the Midway also was where they dumped all the rides because the rides weren't classy enough for the main fairgrounds. So all the fun stuff was just, put out onto this other kind of plot of land. They had all their very serious, very important, proper fairground where they were like, yes, we're at the forefront of arts and culture and technology. And then there's the other area where you can go to a human zoo and dance to ragtime and ride on a ride. So another thing of note actually is that the food at the fair was said to be horrible. That the food was really bad and very expensive. So people would leave the main fairground and go to the Midway Plaisance for the cafeteria. They had outdoor concessions where all of the good fast food was being offered, including pancake mix. The brownie was unveiled at the World's Fair, and it was the start of Vienna sausages, which started here in Chicago. Thank you. I'm told to be louder, so I'll get a little tipsier first. So early access to the hot dog, also Cracker Jacks. So all of these snack foods, all of the fast food was only available at the Midway Plaisance. And it was such an upset to Burnham that that this basically carnival that was set aside of the World's Fair was so much more successful than the World's Fair itself. And this is where they made all their money, because you could just go to the World's Fair. There was not an admission fee. That was not something that they really conceived of at that point. You came and you spent your money on products, on food, on memorabilia, but there was not an admission fee to the fair. When you went to the Midway Plaisance, you were paying money for these games, for all the different rides, for all these different immersive experiences. And that became wildly popular and was the thing that really drew all of the crowds who then were like, oh, I guess we'll go see what all that electricity is about. So the main draw of the Midway Plaisance was the Ferris wheel. So I do have this picture here of some of the other things it has. Oh, I said I was going to talk about the death. Sorry. That's what comes with being a little bit more drunk while I do this. It had ragtime music and dancing. It had a shooting gallery. It had a menagerie that had trained dogs, horses, and lions. One of the other things that Bloom did was that he published rumors that the lions were free range. So people came to the fair expecting that there was the danger of being mauled by a lion. There were swimming pools. Again, the cafeteria. There was a hall that housed 40 beautiful women from 40 countries. There was, again, the moving sidewalk was actually at the Midway Plaisance as well. And there was a ice train roller coaster that was kept frozen by pipes filled with frozen ammonia gas. Very early ride engineering happening here. So there was a test run of most of these rides before the fair actually opened. The test run of the roller coaster, the frozen train roller coaster, took place a week before the fair opened. And unfortunately, a car jumped off the track, went past the guardrails. Almost all of the people that were on this car suffered pretty horrendous injuries, including broken limbs. But only one casualty was a gentleman who fell completely off the cart and plummeted to his death 15 feet below.
Holy shit.
A week later, the fair opened. So when I start talking more about how this then leads to the creation of all these different early amusement parks too, remember that there are no safety guidelines here. This is the kind of experimental trial runs of all these different ideas. So this guy died. Oh, also to say, this is always true of everything. They did these test runs on employees. So they would say, okay, we're going to do the inaugural test run. All of the construction workers and fair employees get to do the first run of the ride, and then they would get hurt, and then they would open it to the public. So that was also true of the Ferris wheel. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the Ferris wheel. So I have here some pictures. Oh, I forgot to mention the hot air balloon rides. That was another big draw of the Midway Plaisance. We have some different examples of the facades of the buildings. And then I have a picture here, the Hall of Electricity, the fair lit up at night. Sorry, I'm going through all of these now. So imagine though, this is before most homes have access to electricity. Most of the buildings downtown do not have access to electricity. But here we have this kind of grand boulevard that has 200 buildings, and they are lit by electric light. So this is actually absolutely incredible to all of the visitors of the fair, that they get to enjoy it at night, see the future that is represented by incandescent lighting, which follows through to the amusement parks that are inspired by it. I have an ad here for the Little Cairo. Super fun. But then here I have this image that is a close-up of the Ferris wheel. You can kind of see it in the background of other pictures, but here's a close-up where you can actually see how large the carts were. So some info now about the Ferris wheel. While Burnham was planning the World's Fair, he kind of set out a challenge to the general public that they needed a grand monument. They needed a attraction that would rival the World's Fair that had just taken place in Paris, where the Eiffel Tower was unveiled. So at the time that Paris had their World's Fair, the Eiffel Tower, which I think is at sorry, I did look this up for sure. It's 14 to 1600 feet tall. This was the tallest structure in the world. And they were like, okay, we need something just as impressive. So they put out a kind of general call for ideas. So there was a young man who submitted this idea for the Ferris wheel. And when he first submits his plan for the Ferris wheel, Burnham himself rejects it and says, this is a really stupid idea. It will not be supported. It looks too dangerous. People won't get on it. They're going to be afraid to actually get on this. And Ferris said to Burnham, sir, you are an architect, I am an engineer. And that actually did convince Burnham to push it forward to the committee of planners, and the committee for the World's Fair still rejected it. They said, absolutely not, nobody's going to ride this. So Ferris was so excited and passionate about this idea that he had for this massive Ferris wheel that he went out. He used $25,000 of his own money to fund feasibility tests of the design, to hire other engineers to kind of look at his designs and say if they would work. And then he gets other investors to come in. And finally the committee is like, okay, all right, we will let you build this, but here are the rules. And there were 2 caveats. Number 1, it had to be fully independently financed. The World's Fair would not give him any money to build it. And number 2, it had to be built at the Midway Plaisance, far from the real fair, you know, the classy part. So he does it. He put down that $25,000 of his own money initially, and then he raised about $400,000 from other investors, equivalent to about $14 million today, to build the Ferris wheel. So he gets permission to do it with these rules, and he does it. That permission came about 6 months before the fair was finished, by the way. So he manages to do this in 6 months. The Ferris wheel at the World's Fair stood 250 feet tall, had 36 individual cars, each had 40 rotating chairs inside, and the capacity to fit 60 people. So the wheel itself had a capacity of 2,160 passengers. A ride on the Ferris wheel cost 50 cents, which is the equivalent of about $17 a head today, and lasted 20 minutes, which was 2 full rotations. So the first rotation included time to kind of disembark previous passengers, reel people in, and then your second rotation would be an uninterrupted rotation around the axle. The axle that it rotated on was a 71-ton, 45-foot across piece of iron that at the time was the largest forging engineering feat that had ever been created. The engines were fueled by steam boilers in the ground that propelled the steam through several thousand horsepower engines. Ferris would not release the details of this design. People wrote to him asking for the blueprints, and he would not share any of it. So unfortunately, the blueprints for that original Ferris wheel have actually been lost for now. We always find things. And for its inaugural test, you guessed it, they let the employees jump onto it. So there were no casualties, but I do think this is really funny. The inaugural test for the Ferris wheel, to prove that it could do its rotation at all, they did it before the carts were attached to it. And the construction workers of the wheel climbed onto the spokes. And they sat on the spokes while the wheel did its first round. No casualties. They're like, wow, look, it works. Yep. 3 down. Okay. So, all of this is just very, very impressive, right? That's the point, is that it was very impressive. So the Ferris wheel was deconstructed after the World's Fair and moved to Lincoln Park. It was in Lincoln Park between 1895 and 1904 when it was brought to St. Louis for another World's Fair before being demolished. And the pieces of it are buried in St. Louis. Yep. So now we've moved past the initial World's Fair and kind of some of the things that happened there. Most of you are like, oh yeah, the World's Fair. Like, I think Edison was there. There were some murders. Now you're kind of filled in on just how important the cultural impact of this was to Chicago and to the 26 million people who visited it. So now we're going to move into some of the interesting characters that went to the World's Fair, saw everything that they were doing there, and went, this is genius. I'm going to use this to make money. And one of the first people that I'm going to talk about is this guy. Pull him here. Oh, no, wrong order. Sorry. You signed up for this. This is Captain Paul Boyton. I encourage everybody that has their little image folders to actually take a peek at this. So Paul Boyton is so incredibly fascinating, and I wish that there was a Daniel Day-Lewis biopic of his life. But there couldn't be because it's so ridiculous. He's really kind of that like stereotypical Victorian, Edwardian venture capitalist who's so extreme that you can't believe that he exists. And Captain Paul Boyton is, I'm going to say, the inventor of the modern amusement park. But before he gets to that point, so Captain Paul Boyton, he was known as the Fearless Frogman. He's born in 1848. He wanted to experience adventure. He always had this kind of adventurous outlook, so he joins the Navy at 15. Went to serve in the Navy during the Civil War. He goes on to serve in the Mexican Navy and the French Navy during the Franco-Prussian War that Napoleon III started. And then after this experience in the Navy, he comes back to the United States and establishes the U.S. Life-Saving Service, which is the precursor to the Coast Guard. So he is kind of the originator of life-preserving technology. And part of the life-preserving technology that he originates is inflatable life preservers, life suits, and in particular this rubber bodysuit that he invents. And initially, he invents this kind of rubber inflatable bodysuit as a life preserver for passengers on steamships. But then to prove its efficiency, that one's empty. Now it's just straight whiskey. So to prove its efficiency, he starts to do stunts. And then he kind of realizes that straight whiskey. So he, in order to publicize the effect of this suit, he starts to do publicity stunts, and then he kind of realizes, oh, wait a second, I can make so much money just doing these publicity stunts. So he kind of lets go of the entire Coast Guard life preserver thing entirely, and he becomes incredibly famous for doing these daredevil publicity stunts to prove that this rubber suit that he's invented works. So there's that first image I've shown of him in his rubber suit. Then I really want everybody to turn to the next page. There's a lot of these. There are so many images of him like knifing a shark or sailing out of the suit. All these really like funny extreme images of him. So the suit that he invented, what it was a rubber bodysuit that's cinched at the waist and then inflated on both ends. So it was kind of like a wearable life raft. And if you had a paddle, the idea was that you could make your body into a floating raft and then paddle yourself like a boat. And the stunts that he did was to prove that this was safe, and they become increasingly dangerous. So this wearable raft that he had, he would, as the stunts become more insane, more elaborate, he would have a boat attached to his belt that would carry his food and supplies. So he would stop, swim over, grab some food, because these are now taking weeks, sometimes months. These stunts that he would do, he would invite journalists to sail alongside him as he was paddling. Some of his feats include, here we have, paddling the canals of Venice, floating from Pennsylvania to the Gulf of Mexico, paddling across the English Channel in 24 hours. His longest venture in the suit was 1,675 miles. Yeah, over the course of several weeks. So he is very famous as a daredevil who's doing these feats of maritime daredevilry. And Boynton realizes again that he's making a lot more money on publicity doing this stuff than he ever did as selling life-preserving technology. So he kind of becomes more famous as a daredevil, as the Frogman, and he joins P.T. Barnum's circus to do a water circus act. So another thing about the World's Fair is that there's the main fairgrounds, there's the Midway Plaisance, which they're like, put all the riffraff over there. But as such a huge event, it also did attract other sort of events to come and take advantage of the crowd that the fair drew. And P.T. Barnum was present at the World's Fair as kind of its own exhibition. Buffalo Bill was also there. And so he comes to the World's Fair to perform for P.T. Barnum in his water circus. And Boynton sees the World's Fair. He sees the Midway Plaisance. He sees the way that this amusement park has been created. And he goes, this is great. I know how to make a ton of money doing this. So he is really the originator of the idea of a permanent amusement park. So Boynton, after the World's Fair is completed, purchases a lot of land in Chicago and opens Paul Boynton's water chutes, which is the very, very first permanent amusement park. And when I say permanent, like, even before the World's Fair, there are amusement parks, there's fairgrounds, there's roller coasters, there's all these kinds of things, but they're kind of seen as temporary amusements. They're part of carnivals that travel. There's really no sense of a permanent fairground that could support these things. So it's not that the World's Fair is absolutely ground zero for inventing a lot of these things, but it is the first time that it's seen on that scale. And Boynton sees that and says, what if I made this permanent? Because the World's Fair itself is also a temporary structure. So he purchases a bunch of land close to the fairgrounds. Straight whiskey. And he opens the first permanent amusement park. My boss is here. So, go down, Boynton. So this first amusement park that he opens in Chicago, is called Paul Boynton's Chutes, and he is the very first person to put a fence around a permanent amusement park structure and also to charge admission. Because again, the previous fairgrounds, there would be carnivals, there would be fairgrounds, there would be circuses, but admission was free. It was all the different individual acts that would then charge you. But he charges admission to the fair for access to everything in the fair. So Paul Boynton's Chutes in Chicago becomes incredibly popular, and he decides, I'm going to take this elsewhere. And he takes it to Coney Island. So now is really the next chapter of this lecture. So a little bit of background about what is happening in Coney Island during this time. So actually all the way back to Frederick Law Olmsted, who was our landscape architect. Olmsted, who designed Central Park, had this grand idea of creating a natural greenway between Central Park and Coney Island, because Coney Island at that time was underdeveloped, and it was kind of, the idea was that it would be an escape for New Yorkers to leave the city and go to the beach and kind of escape the hustle and bustle of industrial New York. And as soon as he creates an easy access point for getting to Coney Island becomes a red light district. So there are a lot of other developers who saw that People were leaving New York for Coney Island for leisure, and it becomes a big entertainment district. So Coney Island, during those later decades of Olmsted's life, is developed as a place where there's a lot of bars and brothels and kind of random amusements, and also the beaches. But people kind of leave New York to go to Coney Island for leisure. And this idea of leisure as an industry is really developing at this time. So Boynton knows that Coney Island is kind of developing as a leisure district, and he's had such success in Chicago after developing his permanent fairground that he purchases 16 acres of land on Coney Island and opens the first amusement park there. And it is called Sea Lion Park. He had trained sea lions that he would do shows with. So a couple things about Sea Lion Park. Let me revisit this here. So again, it's fenced in. He's charging admission. He is paying special attention to the kinds of attractions that drew people into the Midway.
It's water.
Yep. So Sea Lion Park is a recreation of his successful park in Chicago, but it has trained animals. It has the first loop-de-loop roller coaster called the Loop-de-Loop. It has a lot of different rides and attractions, and it pulls in 20,000 visitors a day. Is a very successful attraction on Coney Island. So again, previously Coney Island is kind of being developed as this leisure district, but nobody's really that organized. There's a lot of different businesses, a lot of different leisure activities that are available at Coney Island, but none of them are fenced in the way that Sea Lion Park is. It's very smart to say, come here, pay the price of admission, and then you have access to everything inside. And all of that kind of contrived space, the thematic space of the World's Fair, is what he's taking into account when he's designing this park. The idea that you can control how a person moves through the space, how they feel inside of it, that they feel like they're kind of on this journey of discovery, but all of it is constructed to create this experience, to create immersive experience, is all stuff that he learned at the World's Fair. So again, these animal shows, he was also paying very special attention. Boynton is a genius. Like, I want a Daniel Day-Lewis biopic of him, because he not only is this crazy guy who's doing these crazy stunts. I know I've probably gone over time already talking about him, but okay, great. But like, he is looking at his audience, and he's really paying special attention to how people behave in the park and what people want. And he's not making decisions based on what he wants. He's looking at how people behave and making decisions based on that. And something he discovers about the theme park is that during the Victorian and Edwardian age, people can't touch each other in public. People can't, go on casual dates. And at the amusement park, on these rides, there's kind of the artificial excuse to bump into each other, to spend some time in the dark, so he sees that and he goes, oh, people are coming for that reason. So he invents the dark ride, which is what we consider anything, like a dark ride is when a tunnel of love, when you're going through a dark space and there's some like illuminated things, but mostly it's for the fact of being in this dark tunnel moving through. So he sees that people are really excited about this excuse to kind of fall into each other, this excuse for kind of contrived intimacy, and then he artificially constructs it on purpose in his parks. So the other rides that he brings in are all these experiences where people are sort of thrown up against each other, where people are falling all over the place, where men have to kind of hold on to their women, where people can go through dark rides, tunnels of love, and emerge through and have this created privacy. and it's very attractive, and it makes him a lot of money. So all of that goes into, again, this early blueprint for what an amusement park needs to entail. So this sea lion park that he built, sorry, I'm like, okay, wait, back to it now. I could talk about Boynton forever. He's so interesting. Okay, so moving on from Boynton. So he makes Sea Lion Park. He's super successful. He is the first one to look at the World's Fair and go, this is very, very smart. I'm going to take all the things I've learned and use it to make a permanent park that makes a lot of money. And he's the first person to do this, and he takes it to Coney Island, which is already a pleasure district. So the next person to learn from this is a man named George Tilliou. And George Tilliou comes from a crime family that is already very established on Coney Island. I just spilled water on my iPad. But the Tillious already have successful business ventures on Coney Island. They own different bars and attractions and these, different things. But they're all kind of disparate. They're all kind of all over the place. And there's also some different crime families operating that are in contention with them that stop them from really doing development for a long time. And after one of these other crime families goes to prison, which is its own lecture, after McCain goes to prison, Tilliou is at an age where he gets married and he goes on his honeymoon. And he decides that for his honeymoon, he's going to go to the World's Fair in Chicago. So he goes to the World's Fair, he experiences the fair, he experiences the Midway Plaisance, and then he comes back to Coney Island. And at first, it takes a couple of years for him to really realize what he wants to do there. He sees the success of Boynton's amusement park. When Tilliou was at the World's Fair, he actually tried to buy the Ferris wheel. And the Ferris wheel had already been purchased for post-fair use in Lincoln Park. So he goes back to Coney Island and decides to build his own version of it that was half as tall, still very successful. But basically he sees all the success of the World's Fair, he sees the Midway Plaisance, and he goes back to Coney Island and he sees all of these different attractions that his family already owns, and he decides that the best way to utilize them is to put them under one roof. So after Boynton creates his own Sea Lion Park, purchases the plot of land, and kind of consolidates all of the other things that his family already owns on Coney Island and puts them together under one name and reopens as Steeplechase. So Steeplechase is a very famous Coney Island park, and I think that now we're at the last of these images here. So we have this guy. So this is Tilly, which is the mascot of all of the parks owned by the Tilliou family. So this icon of Coney Island, of Steeplechase Park that Tilliou eventually opens, is very important, again, in this development of the idea of the amusement park, because the Tilly is a brand unification of all the other disparate attractions that the Tillious already owned. So they take all these different ideas, all these different attractions, and they purchase the land and they put it into one place, and they have this thematic element where the Tilly is the mascot, and now all of these different disparate elements are under the umbrella of one amusement park, which again sets the stage for the next generation of amusement parks. So all of these people kind of see what people are doing before them, and then they kind of take it to the next extreme. So Tilliou sees the World's Fair. He decides, I'm going to build a fair that is all one location, that's permanent. I'm going to charge admission. Tilliou sees what Boynton is doing and says, I'm going to create branding for this. I'm going to create one unified name. I'm going to make bigger attractions. I'm going to make memorabilia for this. And it just kind of builds from there, but it's all coming from this experience that they had of the World's Fair in Chicago. So Tilly is trying to expand further. The next innovators that I want to talk about is Dundee and Thompson. Very quickly, Frederick Thompson was a young architect of the Beaux Arts School, similar to Burnham, who traveled to Chicago and saw the World's Fair and was inspired by what he saw. And after the World's Fair, creates a career for himself designing theme park rides. And one of the most popular that he designs is A Voyage to the Moon, which is the most popular ride at the next World's Fair in Philadelphia. Not Philadelphia, at Buffalo, New York. Sorry, I'm drunk now. You all have to deal with this. I'm so sorry. So Thompson is this young architect. He's very talented. He's been classically educated, and he decides that amusement park rides are what he's going to focus on. So he creates this ride at the Buffalo exhibition, and he finds a business partner who is also very charismatic. So this Voyage to the Moon ride that they invented, which was incredibly popular, which was the most popular attraction at this World's Fair that follows in 1901, called the Trip to the Moon, involved getting onto a spaceship. Once you were on the spaceship, there were hand-cranked simulations going past the windows of different scenes from the world, and then eventually you left the planet and there was an image of the Earth as you left it behind. Once you arrived on the moon, you would disembark the ship, and there would be moon beings called Selenites that came and greeted you. There were moon maidens doing sexy little moon dances, and then you would exit the ride through the mouth of a giant moon monster. And this Trip to the Moon ride was very, very popular until you, who had just opened his own park, Steeplechase, decided to try to purchase the ride from Thompson and Dundee. And they were going to sell to him. They were going to lease the rights to the Trip to the Moon for a year after their initial run at the World's Fair. But in 1902, there was an especially rainy season in Coney Island, and viewership for these other amusement parks was pretty down. So Boynton decided to sell his entire park to Thompson and Dundee. So instead of them making a deal with Tilly, they instead purchased all of Sea Lion Park and became a competitor of Tilly. So at this point, Thompson and Dundee have a lot of developed showmanship, kind of these personas that they're using to sell these rides. They believe that they are roller coaster tycoons in their own right. They are very brilliant, and other people are trying to buy into their rides. So they invest $200,000 of their own money into Sea Lion Park and rebuild it as Luna Park. So Luna Park becomes kind of one of these other initially very famous Coney Island parks, and many other amusement parks after this fact are called Luna Parks because Luna Park, as they developed it, becomes the blueprint for amusement parks in America. Also, their interest and involvement in this 1901 World's Fair that was in Buffalo kind of creates this after effect of lots of other copycat amusement parks. So all these other people kind of went to the World's Fair, invested all this money, were like, this is an experiment, let's see if this works. But after the success of their ride in 1901 at the Buffalo World's Fair is when it really takes off, and when all of these many dozens of amusement parks start to be built. All these copycat amusement parks that are taking their blueprint from Steeplechase and Luna Park and what is next, Dreamland. There was a U.S. Senator that purchased some land in Coney Island to build a competitor land to Steeplechase, Sea Lion Park, and Luna Park. He opens his amusement park in 1904, Dreamland, which was billed as kind of a classier version of these other amusement parks. It was meant to mirror more of the World's Fair cultural integrity. It was billed as a classier, more expensive experience, but it wasn't managed as well as the other parks, so it was a financial failure. But some things about Dreamland, briefly. It had more lights combined than all of the rest of the Coney Island parks. It had a replica of Venice. And again, it billed itself as a more refined, high-class version of Luna Park. It eventually closed after being destroyed by fire in 1911. So at this point, a lot of other copycats are starting to come up. There are smaller amusement parks being built all over the country that are being billed as White City Parks and Luna Parks, because regardless of what they're actually called, they are following the blueprint of the Midway Plaisance here in Chicago and of the Luna Park in Coney Island. And those are the two kind of distinct blueprints of what an amusement park needs to contain. And that is these different cultural zones, these different distinct rides, this cultural experience of entering the park, entering a different space, and then being sort of catered around these different zones. So eventually, those get recreated here in Chicago. And I'm winding down a little. Sorry, I have no idea how long I've been talking now.
You're great. You're doing so good.
Excellent. I'm fine. So after Boynton's initial Chicago park is established, there are some other copycat parks invented here in Chicago. And the most famous of those is the Riverview Park. Yeah, so probably some people here who were able to go to the Riverview Park.
No, but I heard about it.
Yeah. The Riverview Park is so integral to Chicago history, to many people's experience of Chicago. It was an amusement park that was built here in the city that was a White City Park. So again, Luna Parks, White City Parks was kind of a overall umbrella term for amusement parks that were built in the design of the Midway Plaisance. And Riverview was one of those. It was founded in 1904 by a Chicagoan named William Schmidt to compete with Boynton's Park, water chutes. It had shoot the chutes. Yes, I'm so drunk now. I'm sorry. So it had multiple wooden roller coasters. It had a 70-horse carousel. It housed the famous Aladdin's Castle Funhouse with a trick stairway and over 120 other rides by the time it closed in 1967. So some of the kind of cultural background of the closing of Riverview Park. So Riverview Park exists from 1904 to 1967 and is so important in the experience of Chicagoland for many, many people that grew up during this time. And when that actually starts to change is during the 1950s when integration happens for the first time. So something that, again, could be its entirely own lecture when we're talking about the World's Fair is that while the World's Fair was an expo of culture and international cultural significance, there was a concerted effort to push back against the influence of African Americans at the time. African Americans were not allowed to have their own building at the fair, were not allowed to have their own lecture halls. Ida B. Wells was not allowed to speak on her own in ways that were initially planned. These are all public figures that were kind of at their height at the time, and they were very much sorry, it's just that I'm drunk. They were not given their voice during the World's Fair. So the World's Fair was supposed to be this, beacon of multicultural exchange, but African Americans were still largely regulated to the back, were not allowed to be given their due platform during that time. So when Riverview becomes integrated during the 1950s, immediately there's a lot of pushback. So racial tensions in the city were very high, and as Riverview begins to integrate, meaning allowing Black Chicagoans into the park, there's a lot of pushback. There begins to be this idea that the park is becoming seedy and dangerous because African Americans are present in the park. And this leads to a lot of tension because the amusement park acts as a place where young people are allowed to be unsupervised. So, exactly, they're canoodling, they're mixing. So the idea that there are Black and white Chicagoans mixing at this place, it becomes a point of contention. And in 1966, Mayor Daley actually closed the park during the days that MLK visited Chicago because he was concerned about race rioting moving into the Riverview Park. And eventually this idea that Black people being allowed into the park is making it seedy and dangerous leads to its closure in 1967. It was, yes.
Belmont and Western.
Yeah, there's people here who went to it.
Come to our Rock tour. There's a sign in there at the street banners. We'll show you.
And you go along the river
of the rides that
Yeah.
are buried in the forest.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of Chicagoans have very important, interesting personal experiences that took place at the Riverview Park. And there really hasn't been anything since that has rivaled it as far as an amusement park within the city limits for people to experience. So the last things that I want to talk about, a couple of the other just like interesting facts that kind of permeate around this idea. So the idea, of course, is that they created the World's Fair as this very classy, world-class exhibition of progress, and then they were like, oh, actually people really like the trashy part of it. And then some very smart people saw everybody going to the trashy part of it and said, I can also make money doing that. So the blueprint of the American amusement park was really built by the World's Fair. Even this, the idea of a main street, of a central boulevard with water features, this idea of visiting other lands, of going to other immersive environments, all originated at that World's Fair that people experienced here in Chicago and then kind of echoed out into these other amusement parks that started to be built after 1901, not just the Riverview Park, but after that point, once Coney Island is established, there are dozens and dozens of smaller amusement parks that start to be built, and all of these parks are actually called White City Parks. It doesn't matter what they're called or what their developers call them, but the idea of a White City Park is something that is deeply established in the design of the World's Fair and the design of the Midway Plaisance. So moving into the 20th century, the last thing I guess I'll talk about, and then I'll wrap it up here, is so a young man named Elias, who was born in Canada in 1859, made his way across the American West working odd jobs until ultimately settling his family in Chicago in 1892. He bought a plot of land in Hermosa and built a house there. During those years, he worked odd construction jobs in the World's Fair, and then eventually gave birth and raised his 5 children in that house, including Roy and Walt Disney. Yes. So alias Disney was a construction worker on the World's Fair, and I think that there's definitely something to be said on that experience that he had on being part of the World's Fair construction, on contributing to it, and then raising his children here in Chicago. There were already a lot of famous amusement parks by the time Walt Disney was at the height of his empire and developing Disney World, but I want to bring it back to Chicago as far as the influence that he must have had listening to his father talk about how important the World's Fair was, how influential it was to work on some of that construction, and also on the ideas that it must have left with him on as far as creating an experience of other cultures. When Disney was developing his park system, that idea of visiting other cultures, visiting other places in the world. I'm punching the mic now. That very Victorian kind of racist version of visiting other countries did directly influence Disney's plan of Epcot, where you visit other countries in these small kind of spurts of experience. This idea of thematic space and immersive experience was all developed here in Chicago, and people experienced that for the first time here in Chicago, and then took that experience and went on to their own ventures and turned it into the idea of the amusement park that we have today. So yeah, that's it. And that's it. So,
Questions? Raise your hand.
yes.
Oh, okay. So with the Ferris wheel, did Bonham ever admit that, because basically the Ferris wheel is what saved the fair?
Yes.
Made all the money. Did he ever like step back and say, "Oh, okay, this Ferris wheel was a good idea"? Or did he ever admit that, or was he too?
You mean did Barnum do that?
Burnham,
So
not Burnham.
actually, so not only did that not happen, but Ferris had to file a lawsuit to get his due payment out for the World's Fair, because the Ferris wheel made so much money back that it went into litigation for years, actually, for him to be paid out for his own expenditure.
And did he ever do anything else for Mr. Ferris? Did he ever make anything?
He didn't do enough for you?
Well, I know the Ferris wheel, but,
I'm not actually too sure about that.
I've never heard of anything else from him. So.
So the money from the Ferris wheel then went to who? It still went to the fair.
So it was in litigation for a long time, and then when it did get paid out, I can tell you this confidently, it went to the World's Fair, because the deal that he eventually made with them was that 50% of the funds from the Ferris wheel would go back to the World's Fair, and then he still had to go to litigation afterwards to get that 50%. And it was years in court. So he basically funded the World's Fair.
And most of the songs, everything
Yes.
from the songs was about.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Question?
Do you know if Boynton, if his frog suit influenced any of the modern scuba suits?
Yeah, absolutely. So did Boynton's frog suits influence modern scuba suits? Yes, absolutely. So his invention of a rubber suit that could be completely submersible and keep the wearer dry, again, was the precursor to the modern Coast Guard. And a lot of his patents are now owned by the American Coast Guard. So, yeah. Essentially, like the invention of a submersible suit is down to Boynton, who completely moved away from all of that and instead became a amusement park tycoon. So,
I have a question. I've researched the World's Fair before, and I heard that
Some of the Inuit villagers actually passed away because they were forced to wear fur parkas. And I was wondering if you found anything confirming or denying.
I don't know if that's true, but I believe it 100%. So the thing about the human zoos, these ethnographic villages that were a World's Fair attraction, is that they were largely funded by the different nations that they were representing, but they were catering to this very racist, subtractive view of different cultures that the visitors to the fair had. So they would hire actors to essentially play out scenarios every day that supported these different, very diminutive ideas of what these different cultures existed as. So I believe it.
The Field Museum was also unveiled during the World's Fair, right?
So, the World's Fair, again, 150 to 200 temporary buildings. There are 2 buildings that were constructed as part of the World's Fair that still exist today. The Museum of Science and Industry is now actually known as the Art Institute. So that building was not originally the Art Institute. There was a Hall of Arts that was completely separate, but the Art Institute now is inside of that building that was part of the World's Fair, so it was part of that construction. The Museum of Science and Industry is another one. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the Field Museum, back to her question, I think the Field Museum.
The Field Museum was built to house all the collections that people left behind.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't go in it.
So like,
I wasn't sure, I knew there was a connection.
Field donated money to build a museum because so many of the countries that shipped their shit overseas were like, you can keep it. And so the city built a museum to house those collections.
Okay, thank you.
But it's the Art Institute building and the Museum of Science and Industry.
Yes,
And the
but
original taxidermy collection was also collected for the World's Fair
Right.
as part of the various countries.
yeah.
Okay.
So that initial 690-acre World's Fair campus did stretch from where the current Art Institute is to the Science and Industry building at the museum campus. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to,
Oh, yeah.
The Ferris wheel was demolished after St. Louis.
Yes.
Was it deemed unsafe, or was there a reason for it?
That I'm actually not sure of. I think it was probably deemed unsafe. I know that the pieces of it are buried in St. Louis.
They know where they are.
They know where they are.
Someone in the comments.
There have actually been additional architectural digs.
They did
Mhm.
surveys.
Yeah.
And, they know exactly where all the pieces are, but they didn't dig them up.
Yeah.
Including the axle.
Mhm.
Thank you, Eleanor, in the comments.
Mhm.
for teaching me that.
Yeah. Any other questions?
no, I was gonna, say you mentioned about Epcot and Disney,
Mhm.
that, even before Epcot, the Disney World in Orlando had it's a small world
Mhm.
area, which also kind of mimics that idea of,
The Grand Tour.
different cultures, but
Mhm.
the World's Fair, as you mentioned, did present all these other, cultures, or had countries putting on their own exhibits, but not only was it very racist, but it kind of cemented the idea, I think, in American culture of viewing other places to visit other countries as exotic.
Oh, absolutely.
Strange, in a
Yeah.
kind of interesting and curious way, but as inferior. And, because of the way, as you pointed out,
Mhm.
people acting out these ridiculous stuff, so like, oh, the Egyptians, these people, whatever,
Mhm.
like, oh, aren't they crazy, goofy, weird, but kind of like the white, that's how they were presented.
Yeah.
But the white audience, mainly white audience of the World's Fair was made to feel like, but we are better than that, like.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a huge part of the World's Fair was also to establish American exceptionalism, to kind of bring the idea of the World's Fair in Chicago was also to not just unveil Chicago, but to unveil America as this very exceptional, leading kind of cultural point. that they housed all of this stuff, but that they were at the forefront of all of this technology, that they were leading as far as technological advancements in this Western New World. And, you know, all of this different branding, all of this idea of branding also comes out of that World's Fair experience. No, yeah, absolutely.
I was going to make a comment and tag a question, but I'll make it really short. And that was if you had anything to say about the 1933 World's Fair, just in terms of, no, not about the whole thing, but just about, do you think it also had an influence in, you know, mid-20th century, or compared to the 1893? Probably not as much,
I think that definitely not as much. So something interesting, just personally to me, is that I'm a fourth generation Chicagoan, and my grandfather was at that 1933 World's Fair as a young boy. And he used to tell me about it, and that it was, you know, so exceptional for him and so interesting and important. And, you know, from our point of view now, we can kind of look at it with a lot more nuance. But from his point of view, as a little boy that grew up in the Great Depression era, you know, that the way that they kind of feed it to people as, again, this experience of American exceptionalism was so pervasive and effective as being like, you know, everything that we do is justified because of this exceptionalism, because of all this progress that we're making. So I don't have as much to say about it as far as its influence. But I do think that that idea of the World's Fair representing a lot of progress and a lot of exceptionalism and a lot of inspiration to other people that then go on to use that as justification is interesting and important moving into the 20th century. I'm going to answer Patty in a second, but before I stop, yes. So I'm going to leave in a second, but I brought something that is part of my personal collection. Sorry, this is, so as far as the World's Fair inventing branding, as far as inventing memorabilia, I have here a teacup from the 1893 World's Fair that would have been sold as memorabilia. So this teacup is 130 years old. Would have been sold to visitors of the World's Fair. And as long as you're very, very careful with it, I'm going to leave it here on this table, and please be very careful with it. I'm going to leave it out for you. Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Mm-hmm.
Before we wrap up, I want everyone, please give Sam a big round of applause.
Oh, it closed in 1908.
Many of our speakers are nervous, so, you know, they really appreciate a nice round of applause. Sam swore she was never, she texted me on Tuesday and said, I'm never doing this again, but she said 5 lecture ideas in the course of her lecture, so I think we're good. If you want more from Sam, come on our Edgewater tour this summer and hear about all the people that died there. If you... On the topic of death, tonight is the night where you can register for Layla's talk in 2 weeks about the history of forensics. So make sure you sign up for that. You can get tickets today. And then we'll see you guys back here next week for a very exciting talk about the history of candy. There will be candy. There will be candy. So you can sign up on our wait list. I often release tickets to the entire wait list, but no one claims them. So make sure you check your email if you sign up on the wait list, and you'll almost always get a spot. Finally, if you have a great time tonight, throw us some money and please tip your bartender. Thanks, guys.